Hello everybody, it's me, Mr. Tall23, back in another video. I just want to do a quick sound check first to make sure that the sound is working. Alright. Wish that didn't take so long. Okay, so the sound is working. Anyway, in this video I'm going to be talking about the new book which I have just published. I published it about 2 weeks ago. It was May 21st that I published this book, but I just received the proof copy in the mail just yesterday. And this is something that I've talked about on my channel. I think I first talked about in December, the fact that I was writing this book, and it's called Why I Left the Hebrew Roots Movement. I might turn this on so you can see it better. I don't know. It probably just leaves a glare. Man, I wish this camera wasn't as bad as it is. Maybe I gotta turn this a little bit so there's not the glare in the window either. Okay, so it's called Why I Left the Hebrew Roots Movement. And I've been working on this for a while. I started working on it in September. I probably wrote about 30, 40 pages in that first 2 weeks or so. And then during the winter break that we had a few months later, I wrote probably 50 or 60 more pages. And then the vast majority of the book, about 2/3 of it, I've written during this whole period in which there was a quarantine beginning in early March. And I finished it in late May. So just a couple weeks ago. So I've been working hard on this, and I finally finished it and published it. And it's basically the story of how I got into the Hebrew Roots movement, and then how I left, and then that is followed by a refutation of the Hebrew Roots doctrine. So there's 5 chapters in total. The first 3 chapters are my personal testimony. The 4th and the 5th chapter are a refutation of the Hebrew Roots movement. So when it says why I left the Hebrew Roots movement, that means like literally why I left, as in the story of how I left, but then also the reason why I no longer hold to that doctrine, the doctrines of the Hebrew Roots movement, using the scriptures. So it's 292 pages long. This is about how thick it is. I'll just do a quick kind of scan through. Maybe you can see that the pages, right? So there are 5 chapters. Chapter 1 is my transition to the Hebrew Roots movement, in which I talk. Oh, there's actually an introduction before that, but chapter 1, I talk about how I got into the Hebrew Roots movement, my early religious history as a child growing up, my experience with Christianity, etc. Chapter 2 is life in the Hebrew Roots movement, what it was like for that 2-year period. Chapter 3, salvation, change into a fundamental Baptist, in which I explain how I heard the gospel, when I got saved, and what happened after I got saved, and how I left the Hebrew Roots movement. And then chapter 4 is the errors of the Hebrew Roots movement, which focuses on doctrine. The doctrines which I cover include their lifting up of Israel and the Jewish people and the Hebrew culture, their idea of the sacred name, the idea of the Hebraic roots of the New Testament, because a lot of them believe that the New Testament was written in Hebrew with no evidence whatsoever. Then I go into salvation, about how we're not saved by the Torah, how the Torah in some places has done away with the carnal ordinances. And that's followed by a discussion of heaven and hell, then a discussion of the Trinity. And then chapter 5 is more of it's still a refutation, but it's not really a doctrinal thing. I focus on false prophecies made by Hebrew Roots teachers, and then go into the historical lies that they have concerning the Nimrod and the Constantinian kind of stuff. There are 2 Babylons kind of thing, where they think that everything in Christianity is from Babylon, everything is pagan, and they accuse everything of being pagan. I explain why that's wrong from a historical perspective. So those are the subjects that I cover in this book. Just reading the back. It says, for 2 years, I was a part of a rising new movement among Christians known as the Hebrew Roots movement. This religion places an emphasis on keeping the Torah and going back to the alleged Hebraic roots of Christianity. My whole life centered around the idea that Christianity had been corrupted with paganism and that these doctrines were the truth. However, in June 2018, after hearing the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, I believed on Jesus and was saved. I left the Hebrew Roots movement and through a thorough study of the Bible realized that my cherished beliefs of the past were lies and false doctrine. In this book, I take you through my personal journey into and out of the Hebrew Roots movement and provide a detailed refutation of the core beliefs and practices of this faith using the scriptures. So that's what this book is about. You can find it on lulu.com if you're interested in reading it. In a few months, I think it takes like 6 or 7 months for distribution on other places. It'll be up on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and some other distributors. I'm not exactly sure all the ones that they offer, but for now, they only sell it on lulu.com, and that's where I published it. So it's a self-published book, but lulu.com prints it and distributes it. So just find Why I Left the Hebrew Roots Movement, or just type in my name, Alexander Larson, on lulu.com, and you should be able to find it. So this is what it looks like. Again, it has a pretty distinguished cover. I mean, probably shouldn't have any trouble finding it. Why I Left the Hebrew Roots Movement by Alexander Larson. So another thing I could say about this book is there are I started reading through it and just kind of looking through it, and I did do some editing on it, but apparently I missed some things because I found already a few typos in it, and they're just minor typos. They're like the word "or" is written as "of" instead, or something like that in one place. But it's not so riddled with typos that you can't read it. It's like maybe one per chapter or something, very minor things. So because there's some books out there, you pick them up and it's like every paragraph, every sentence has a typo in it, and you can't even tell what they're trying to say. So I tried editing it the best I could. I apparently missed things, and I do have an option to republish it and just fix that little mistake, but there's not really a point in my opinion, because in that case I would need to wait another 2 weeks to get another proof copy, only for a few minor typos. I don't think it's really necessary. I think if people read what the sentence said, they would understand what it means. It's not difficult to figure out. So yeah, if you want to know my religious history, how I got into the Hebrew Roots movement, why I left it, how I became a Hebrew or fundamental Baptist, how I left the Hebrew Roots movement, and then a detailed refutation. So the whole back right here, all this, trying to flip through it. This whole section is just a scriptural explanation of why the Hebrew Roots movement is wrong, and then just this first like 77 pages or so, this little section right here. All these, this is my personal testimony. So don't really have anything else to say. I've only published 2 books before, so not really good at reviewing or explaining it. But if you want to check it out again, lulu.com, I'll leave a link in the description of where you can find it if you need help with that. So yeah, that's it. I don't know what I'm going to work on next. I do have plans for some other books, but this one is, I'm glad I got this one published. I put a lot of work into this. Anyway, thank you, buddy, for watching, and that's it for this video, and goodbye. God bless you.